The way of creative transgression requires courage. It is not easy to step beyond something that has named us, held us, and even fed us. When our eyes are opened to the curses in our lives, we need the courage to see, to tell the truth, to grieve, and when it is time, to transgress and reach. You can find that passage on page 140 of Dr. Vanya Leilani's book, The Flesh and the Fruit, Remembering Eve and the Power of Creative Transgression. Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge what a tumultuous month January was for so many in our community in so many different ways. So let's take a moment just to breathe together, in and out. Please know that your whole self is welcome here, and that simply by being here, you are creating the space for everyone else's whole selves to be here too, the same way they are creating space for you. So let's breathe together again. And I thank you for being here. My name is Joanna Gardner, and I am delighted to welcome you to today's MythLit webinar hosted by the Fates and Graces for the myth community to read together and celebrate the field of mythological literature. We also have Stephanie Zachowski with us today. Stephanie and I are absolutely thrilled to welcome Dr. Vanya Leilani to MythLit. We enjoyed reading Dr. Leilani's beautiful book so much, and we're excited to hear more from her about the myth of Eve in the Garden of Eden, which has been so foundational for so many people, and also the related idea of creative transgression. I think Steph will drop the link to this book into the chat. And Vanya, before we go any further, I would love to invite you to take the virtual microphone and offer a few words of greeting or introduction to the community.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Joanna and Stephanie, for having me here. And thank you for leading us through that moment of breathing together. And thanks everyone for being here. I am really grateful to be here. I'm looking forward so much to this conversation around, like you said, creative transgression in such a timely moment where we can wonder about the power of disobedience to liberate. And also wanted to invoke Eve here in our circle, such a powerful figure that has so much to teach us about choosing knowing over obedience and choosing sovereignty over safety. And I'm grateful for her and I trust her medicine. And I just wanted to name her here at the beginning and invoke her here among us. And know that she's here with her medicine for us at this exact moment in time. So thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vanya, and welcome to Eve. Eve is more than welcome
Yes.
to our circle today. We'll dive more into the book in just a minute, and then we'll have time for questions from the community. So everyone, as we go, please feel free if any questions come up for you or thoughts or comments or reflections, click that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and put them in there, and then we'll be able to find them easily when it's time for the Q&A. But first, let's have a chat check-in. So open up the chat if you haven't already, and let us know where you're joining from. And my invitation today is if there's anything that you're hoping to gain or even bring into being in our time together today, would love to hear that in the chat as well. I am joining from Santa Barbara. And my hope today is to kind of bring a bubble of peace into being in this time that we have. So that's what I'll offer. Vanya, would love to hear if there's anything that you're hoping to gain today or to bring into being in our time together.
I hope that we will all gain a little bit of more of the taste of what creative transgression can bring into our lives in our own days and also in our cultural moment. And and again, I hope that we will all sort of feel Eve's medicine in us and feel strengthened by her wisdom.
Mm. So the potential of creative transgression and the wisdom and healing of Eve. Did
Yeah.
I get that right?
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Steph, what about you? What are you hoping to gain or to bring into being? And then we'll go to the chat.
Yeah, I would love to bring into being today courage, akin to that initial quote. These are hard territories to walk into, and yet that's where life is. And so the courage to transgress and make those steps. Yeah.
Courage. Yes, thank you. I just feel so strongly that naming these intentions makes them so real just in the moment of naming, right? And not only in that moment, but then carrying forward. So thank you so much for sharing those intentions. So beautiful. And Steph, are what's going on in the chat? Are we hearing more intentions as well?
We have a few, well, and people from all over the world. So welcome. That's exciting to see. Yeah. And Jody's black cat is saying hello to your black cat, Vanya, in the background. Do you
Oh,
have a kitty back there? Yeah.
I have a lot of animals here with me. So
They're all welcome. Everyone's
Yes.
welcome.
my
Yeah.
cat hi back.
And then Maggie is saying that she just loved the book so much and wants to hear more about embodying Eve and creative transgression. So
That's a perfect intention for this hour that we'll be together. That's the whole goal.
We're on the same page.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. So before we go to Q&A, Steph and I have a few questions for you, Vanya. So I guess we could sort of consider this, we could use the word interview, but it's more of a conversation, really, than an interview. And what we'd love to start with is, as you've already mentioned, is the presence of Eve, right? Archetypal Eve, who is so incredibly influential, as the book points out, but so rarely takes center stage, right? She's in the background of our awareness more than the foreground, I feel like. So my curiosity is what your relationship with Eve is like today, now that you've written this book for her and about her. So you've already alluded to this a little bit, but just if there's anything else you'd like to add about what your relationship with Eve is like.
Yeah, I mean, what floods me as you ask that question is gratitude. I have a lot of love and gratitude toward Eve for how she has been one of my greatest teachers and also witnesses and companions, because this is the thing about Eve, right? She's between worlds. She's liminal. She knows what it's like to be obedient, to be good in that way, to be um compliant, and she knows what it's like to also desire and long and listen and trust and then transgress. And she knows what it's like to lose the old way and the old favor and the old belonging, and to be cast into a time of wandering and searching for her new place and much more. So Eve not only is this teacher about transgression, which we'll talk about more, but also a close witness to this process that we all go through of weighing our courage and our fear, and hopefully listening deeply to our wild lives and what's calling to us, and then reaching. So I grew up hearing about Eve as a symbol of my inferiority and my guilt, and as many of us did. And second to be created, first to sin. This is the message. It's not peripheral, it's central. And yet then in my early 20s to discover her, to be visited by her as that archetypal mythic Eve, that psycho-spiritual force that says, yes, I know what it's like to be good, and also I transgressed and I became sovereign, and having her accompany me through all those stages. And so today, as you asked me that question, I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for her medicine. I think of her as homeopathic. You know, she's carried so much of this illness, but she also carries our medicine. You know, another way to think about it is that I think of Eve as a seed buried in our cultural unconscious and conscious lives, waiting to sort of bring her wisdom and her medicine to us. And so that's my relationship with her in a few sentences. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm noticing what you're describing is like a completeness of experience, not a one-sided kind of experience, but a fullness of experiences and ways of knowing, um,
Yeah.
and appreciating also, um, just her presence here, you know, not in the background, but in the foreground, in a
Yeah.
companion-like way.
Yeah. Because when I started researching Eve, it was out of love. I already had a lot of gratitude for her as my teacher and my companion, you know, my accompanier sort of through this journey. And also, I thought I'd write mostly about how harmful the treatment of this literalized version of this myth has been in our culture, which there is a lot there, and we could go talk and, you know, for a long time about that. The way that this creation myth has been used as a blank slate for all kinds of horrors, really, of violence and exclusion. And that all is true, and that's what I mean by she's carried our illness in many ways, right? This has become a symbol of that in a sense. But what I discovered as I really got into Eve was that she has this magnificent mythic imaginal context that she belongs within, and actually remembering her is to return and reclaim to so much that's been cast into the shadows of patriarchal consciousness. And so discovering that, you know, Eve's linked to this long line of earth goddesses, and her belonging in this beautiful lineage and ancestry of the feminine sacred, and how when she was banished from the garden, this was a banishment of the feminine sacred, of the images that belonged there, the ways of knowing and being. So we don't just remember Eve, we remember this whole part of nature that we are and that we need right now, you know, because hopefully we're expanding our ways and transgressing beyond the patriarchal rule in the inner spaces and, of course, in the outer spaces, in the external places. So Eve is a very complex and beautiful mythic figure for us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So that's kind of a great segue into the idea of creative transgression. You know, Eve is an image, right? Eve is a mythic image that you know we can summon up in our imagination, and she's connected with this kind of more abstract idea of creative transgression. So would love to kind of unpack that and hear your thoughts about what it means. What does creative transgression mean to you, and you know, more generally as well?
Yeah. So, of course, at the heart of this myth is this transgression that reverberates, right? Eve took the fruit, the forbidden fruit. And of course, the story we've all gotten is now everything's, you know, ruined, to put it lightly, you know. But I want to back up and go back to this word transgression, which means to step beyond or across. That's what it means. And it's interesting that in this language, in the English language, transgression has been equated with evil. And that's not accidental, right? Because again, in patriarchal consciousness, in other words, hierarchical system of power over, obedience is necessary, is required for it to work. And to step across or beyond that boundary would be catastrophic, to that system. But to come back to this idea that in our imagination and our cultural sort of use of the word, disobedience or transgression is equated with evil. And I think that's interesting. I'm just going to drop that seed there for us to meditate on that. And how does that show up in our own lives? Do I experience disobeying as somehow a moral failure or an evil? And that they're not the same thing. To transgress is to step across, to go beyond what's been prescribed or what's been mandated. And we see this not only in myth, of course, Eve is one example, Ariadne is another, Psyche is another. And quick note here, because we're mythologists, they're all beautiful examples of creative transgressions that are enacted in different ways. Eve is one way. And we could talk the whole time about just that, right? But I'll just mention that we see this all over in myth. We also see it in the new sciences, complexity theory and systems theory, where there's this idea that, or this idea that systems will reach this state of stability, of symmetry. And at some point they break open into asymmetry and something reaches beyond the status quo. And Joseph Cambray called this transgressive force the key to the evolution of life. I think we're talking about the same thing, this pattern in nature, that in order for life to continue to unfold, transgression is required. And we see that, of course, again, in our psycho-spiritual realms and in our mythic realms. And we also see this enacted in more than human realms and in these other parts of nature. So this is elemental to us. It's not something we made up, right? It's a part of the unfolding and the continuation of this great mystery that we're living in, that frankly, probably have no idea what's really going on, but it's this unfolding of life, this mystery, and transgression is right there at the heart of it. And Eve is a really powerful example of that, right? So when I talk about creative transgression, I'm talking about that pattern, that at some point, the status quo, the obedience needs to be ruptured and stepped across and beyond in order for us to stay alive and continue to become and continue to unfold. Does that answer your question?
That opens up an amazing conversation. Thank you so much. A couple of things I want to lift up from what you shared. One is the three myths, Eve, Ariadne, and Psyche, and how you pointed out how they each transgressed in a different way, right? And I think that's so important. Like the word creativity, creativity researchers define that word as something that's creative is both new and useful or helpful or beautiful, somehow has value, right? If it has value, but it's not new, it's not creative, right? If it's new, but it's not valuable somehow, it's not creative. And so implied in this phrase, creative transgression, is something new. You can't predict it in advance. It has to be new and kind of unique, the way that we see with Psyche, Ariadne, and Eve, right? They each transgressed in their own particular way, in their own particular context, right? And just one more thing I'll offer, and it brings up, you mentioned complexity theory, and complexity theory has that idea of the adjacent possible, right? The newness emerges into what is just right next door to the current situation. It's not like, let's go to Mars, for example. It's like, what can we do right here, right now? And I think that's what Eve did. The apple was right there, right? She didn't, go someplace else to do a creative transgression. She acted from right where she was, from a very embodied, local, particular place. And I just think there's so much potential there because we're all in our own particular place, right? So thank you so much for like, I don't know that I heard the phrase creative transgression before reading this book. And so thank you so much for creating that phrase. I think it's so powerful. Yeah. Any thoughts or responses to that at all?
I mean, so many, yeah, but I'll just say that, yeah, that's so beautiful and you're bringing us back into this, starting close in and right here where we're at. I love that. And I think it speaks to, I think it was Maggie's question too, how do we embody this right here? Which we'll talk about more maybe in the Q&A. But I wanted to just say too that Eve and Ariadne and Psyche as examples, yeah, they enact in really different ways, and we don't have time to get into it. But it's really valuable because so much of our work, I think, in our labor of creating these more expansive, liberated lives is to cultivate complexity and multiplicity. There isn't the one way. There are many ways, right? So I love that reminder, but also that in each case, there are some similarities. They're driven by love and desire. And also in each case, what happens is that they become like the gods, including Eve. That's right there in Genesis. It's not, again, I'm not making it up. The gods convene at the end. Now they've become like us. What will we do? It's interesting. Nobody ever highlighted that to me in Sunday school, but that's what's happening. Psyche ends up, of course, with Eros on Olympus, Ariadne with Dionysus, and they all end up in this more sovereign place, this knowing place. And that is that sense of creative transgression toward new consciousness and toward sovereignty. And I just wanted to make sure to circle that back around with Eve. The serpent was telling the truth and was correct. No, you will not die, you'll become like the gods. And at the end of the myth, the gods say, ooh, they've become like us. What will we do? And so there's this implication of this creative transgression that has to do with our sovereignty, with our existence, right? With our sense of standing at the center of our own circles and existing as that part of nature. Yeah.
Existing in the center of our own circles and that sense of sovereignty, wanting to kind of zero in on the feeling. Like, what does that feel like? Sovereignty. Anything coming up for you? I mean, I'm imagining it myself, like the feeling of sovereignty, right? Sovereignty over myself, my soul, my life. And there's a feeling of fullness and a feeling like I feel my spine get a little straighter. And I'm more aware of my body.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering if you have any thoughts about what does it feel like when you feel most sovereign? How does that feel?
Yeah. When I feel most sovereign, it feels like peace. And it feels like freedom. It feels like connection. And it feels like an exhale. Here I am. And also, sovereignty is weighty. Sovereignty is not a light thing. Sovereignty involves us choosing our own sacrifices and understanding that there is no way without sacrifice. That it has to do with who's choosing our sacrifices. That's a really good question for us to ask in questions of sovereignty and just of life, because sacrifice has to do with what's sacred, right, in our lives. And so to inquire into not only what am I actually sacrificing, really honestly, what am I sacrificing today? It's a guarantee that we're all sacrificing something today. What is that? And who's choosing that for me? Because who's choosing my sacrifices is choosing in a large part what I'm consecrating my life to. And so I think sovereignty also has that weightiness of I sacrifice a martyrdom for sovereignty. And so I also become someone who can bear the weight of my choice, who can bear the vastness of my grief, who can face my mistakes and my failures with grace and friendliness. And it's okay. you know? And so sovereignty is also a complex experience for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, the phrase you said, "Here I am," is resonating for me. Just wanted to lift that up. As part when you were describing sovereignty, you said, "Here I am,"
Yeah.
and that feels very true for me for encapsulating part of that sense of the complex sense of sovereignty.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's a stance, right? That I picture everywhere I go, I'm standing at the center of my own circle. I'm saying, this is how I see the world. This is how I sense the world. This is what I long for, desire, don't like. And it's not because it's the rightest view in all the world. It's because it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I have to contribute. This is my corner of nature to see through my eyes and feel through this body and this connection with the land. And it's that here I am, right
Right.
here. And I'm telling you what it looks like and feels like from here. And again, we can let go of that. It's not because it's better or the best or the one way. No, it's me. It's mine. It's what I have to offer. And I think that's really liberating and beautiful that we can each bring that presence.
Absolutely. So I feel like this is a good moment to shift a little bit and kind of talk about two other ideas in the book, which are shame and curiosity. And they're kind of related in the book. I want to read a couple of passages. Um, and then ask you to comment on that. So if anyone's following along in the book, I'm looking at page 65, where Vanya writes, "We have been convinced that we are the problem, or we have convinced ourselves that we are the ones strong enough to handle this. We swallow the shadow whole and we smile. And then we wonder, why are we tired? Why we are angry? Why we lack vitality? Sometimes, Vanya, this is still Vanya's words, sometimes shame is a canary in the mine, alerting us to a dangerous situation and letting us know we are no longer safe in this environment." And then jumping ahead to page 101, the book talks about what to do about it, right? What to do about shame, and with this idea of curiosity and what Vanya calls the wild pause. And here's what the book says, quote, "Learning to choose curiosity over judgment is an incredibly transgressive act. It is a subversive practice and is a powerful aid in dismantling internalized hierarchy and disrupting eternal systems of exclusion." Over on page 102, and this is the last part I'll read, "The wild pause is a practice that can help us cultivate a curious posture. It is the breath space that allows us to consciously choose curiosity over judgment." So yeah, I just wanted to kind of hold these two ideas side by side. This idea of shame as as a warning signal, not that something's wrong with us, but that there's something wrong with the situation, right? And then getting curious about it with the wild pause and the transgressive aspect of that curiosity. So we'd just like to offer you a chance, Vanya, to reflect on those related ideas, the shame and the curiosity, or expand on them, or anything at all that is coming up for you in the moment.
Yeah. I think, first of all, with shame, and you already encapsulated it so well, the perspective that I'm offering here in that part of the book. But there's this again, that just to say that reminder that shame is a powerful experience, right? And we can often internalize that and interpret it as something's wrong with me. And to take it a little further, that what we're saying is shame is indicating that something wrong, but it probably is not you. It's the gaze that you're under. It's and oftentimes, for me at least, it's about the cruel gaze, the cruelty that of the eyes and the vision and what I'm being named by my environment, whatever that might be. And that shame then becomes an ally. Shame becomes a diagnostic or a remedy that says, get out. This environment is no longer compatible with who you are. And we see that in Eve's myth, right? They have this shame. And to me, that says you've changed. You are no longer compatible, and you still have an attachment to the old way. It's hard to lose belonging. It's hard to lose favor. It's hard to lose the safety. And we can think of that example as one, no amount of, in my opinion, therapy or, self-care would have allowed Eve to remain in the garden and not feel shame, because that was the environment that's constantly assumed you are not good as you are. You are not okay. Do you know what I'm saying? So, and we can bring that into our own lives and just to hopefully have such deep friendship and tenderness toward our wild lives and say, I would never expect another wild creature to live in an environment of cruelty where that's weaponized in this way. Why would I expect that of myself? And so this is where I find shame, again, as this complex experience, but that sometimes is the thing that can both constrict us, but also when that energy is liberated, it can set us free. When we say, no, I will not live under this cruel gaze anymore. And curiosity is, well, let me back up a little. I talk about this in this part of the book too, but this image of the rocking boat is so poignant to me, because don't rock the boat. What's usually happening is the boat's already rocking, the storm is already raging. What is being asked of us is that we use all of our energy, all of our life force to absorb the storm so that nobody else feels it as much, so we can pretend that it's not happening. And so for us to stop, the boat's already rocking. Again, what sacrifice are we making? And I think that can be a strengthening reminder towards our courage. Curiosity is one of the most potent forms of magic that I know, because it turns it turns solid walls into doors. Do you know what I'm saying? We come up against this wall, this stone wall, and when we invoke curiosity, portals appear. It is a really profound kind of magic, not only applicable to shame, but to our days, how we live and how we cultivate what I think more and more is one of the most tender treasures that we can hope for in this life, which is friendship toward our own lives. And curiosity is, I think, one of the most potent magics and ways of cultivating inner friendship. So what that is, that wild pause, is to say, when an experience visits, an emotion, an utterance of the wild soul, a disruption, a symptom, a dream, a desire, a discontent. I mean, every day we're visited by so much that we practice that moment where something arrives, and rather than continuing on in our conditioned responses and in our judgments, this is bad, this is good, this is, that we pause and say, what's visiting? What is actually happening here? And let curiosity do its work in leading us into vaster landscapes where we have more room to play and more room to love our own lives. In other words, really take them into our arms like the tender wild creatures that they are, and just say, I got you. I don't know what this is, but I got you. For example, we might notice in the afternoon, I have this pit in my stomach. I don't feel good. And if I don't pause, I might just say, I'm so sensitive, I'm too tired, I'm hungry, and then suddenly within seconds, we're a 5-year-old hearing all these original messages. You know how that can, and again, that shame and that a judgment. But if I can pause and just be like, I see you, what's happening? I might notice that I started at noon when I had this interaction with a coworker. And then I might get more curious and realize, oh, they seemed polite, but they were being cruel. And then I can take care of my life. Or I might realize they were fine, but it reminded me of this person, which put me in a complex. And then I can take care of that. Again, it brings us closer in to our lives in the moment. And so, yeah, I think we can't say enough about the power of curiosity to cultivate this inner friendship and this sense of freedom to love our own lives.
That is so beautiful. Thank you. And I'm aware too of again, kind of coming back to the body, like the posture of shame is so different than the posture of creativity, right? The posture of shame is, kind of shrunken in and looking down. And the posture of creativity is more like, what's that? It's more looking up. It's looking out. It's open eyes. That's what comes up for me thinking about the embodied aspect of it. And so the shame, like for Eve, her shame arose in the wake of her new knowing, right? Am I getting that right? Am I remembering the myth
Yes.
right? So the new knowing comes up, followed immediately by the shame. And then the opportunity at that moment that the myth offers to us is to invoke curiosity, right? And what I'm thinking, what I'm extrapolating and hypothesizing is that practice, which the book calls it a practice, I would theorize that would reduce the shame's power over time. Am I reading that right? Like the practice of a new knowing, feeling shame, getting curious about it. New knowing, feeling shame, getting curious about it. The more the curiosity practice comes in, the less power the shame has.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I think so. Maybe I would put it too, the more we practice that, the more in touch of our own knowing and sovereignty we are, and the more enabled we are to seek spaces that allow us to be creative and to not live in shame. And of course, there is an inner aspect to this. Also, there is an external aspect to this, right? There's both. And so I think that practice is bringing me closer and closer to my own life. And it's also helping me be able to tell the truth about what I see. And to tell that, and again, not because it's the best truth in all the land, but because it's what I see, it's what I feel, I am here. And the more we can do that, for me, what that feels like is a move into less shame, less self-denigration in that sense, because hopefully we're then able to tend our wild and precious lives in a more appropriate way because we know it. Do you know? So and I love your example with the body because we can really notice again that daily thing. In what spaces am I feeling this? And in what spaces am I doing this? That's my compass. I'm going to move towards the spaces where I notice my body is open. And I'm going to try to minimize the spaces where my body is this. It's a beautiful thing to put. The way I think of it is we're always putting these notches in our inner compass, because when we say, I'm not going to live by obedience to an external law from out here, I'm going to live from an emergent knowing, from body, imagination, nature, which, by the way, again, not coincidentally have been lived and cast into and lived in shadows of patriarchal consciousness. And this reclamation is resistance. This reclamation is dismantling, right, of patriarchal ways, because they say, I am a source of knowing. I am a source of authority. I am a source of sovereignty. And yeah, so as we return to that, I think there's a lot there for us.
I agree. Well, so I am conscious that I have been kind of taking much of our discussion time. So let's get ready to move to Q&A. So everyone, if you have any questions or thoughts or anything you'd like to share at all with Vanya, go ahead and put it in the Q&A. And before we go that, just super quick, Vanya, is there anything, any passage from the book or any ideas from the book that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure to lift up for the community before we go to Steph and the Q&A that's coming in?
You know, the passage that I had chosen, the two we have already talked about.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's about the shame and about us, the sovereignty, the weightiness of sovereignty. So yeah, I can read them again, but I feel like we already talked about them.
Well, why don't you read us sovereignty? How about that?
Yeah. Sovereignty, to be self-belonging and self-governing, is weighty. It is not only the ecstasy of remembering ourselves and our belonging and our power, it is also the knowing that we are strong enough to hold the consequence of choice. It is the courage to stand at the center of our own circles as the sources of our own knowing, permission, and blessing. It is the courage to stand at the center of our own circles, holding the weight of our freedom. When we have a demanding God or goddess, be that a religious image, a collective imperative, an inner voice, or a family figure, as a source of our instructions, we hand over both power and also accountability. We can shake our fists at those gods of Christianity, capitalism, atheism, wellness, etc., and blame them for not giving us knowing or for causing us to choose badly. To be sovereign is to have no one to tell you what to do and also to have no one to blame. We sacrifice martyrdom for sovereignty. When we stand at the center of our own circles, we are creating worlds.
Thank you so much. Everyone, let's hear it in the chat for Vanya and for this fantastic book. Highly recommended. Can't recommend it highly enough. Open up the chat, put some applause, put heart emojis, all the things. Thank you so much, Vanya. That was just wonderful. Yeah, and I am conscious that I've been talking a lot. So Steph, let's come to you. Is there anything that's coming up for you or any questions coming in the Q&A?
Loads coming up for me. I just want to say thank you. Just really needed to hear everything that you're saying today. I think it was just so beautifully well put, and the way you hold the complexity of these ideas, the nuances, the way they're not they're they're hard. These things we're doing are hard, and yet that's, like you say, these are the life-giving spaces. And so it's just your words, your wisdom, the way you're holding everything is just it is giving courageous to me today. So I'm just grateful for everything you're sharing.
Wonderful.
I also, yeah, I want to echo in the chat. There's a lot of wows and epiphanies and just talking about the power of everything you're saying. And then we have lots of questions. So one I'm going to ask first, because the mythologists in the room were enjoying when you were listing all of the different myths where transgression takes place. And so we had two additional ones added. Arthur George, Art, hey Art, said, could we add Pandora to that list of those who transgressed? And another one was from Deborah, Antigone. So just wondering, like, yeah, a little more about that transgression, and is it necessarily a positive outcome, thinking with Pandora's situation. So if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you to Arthur George, who wrote a book, The Mythology of Eden, that I used a lot in my research. So shout out to you. Yeah, well, there's a few questions in that question. I don't know the second story that you mentioned, but in Pandora, and there are some books, I think it was John Phillips's book called, I don't remember exactly. His name's John Phillips. He wrote a book on Eden, and he does this comparison of Eve and Pandora in depth. And I think it's called The Myth of Eve. And So yeah, there are many places where we see transgression. So yes, I think that absolutely they can be added, and we could add many more, right? Even Prometheus. Um, and it's interesting because they do it differently. I'll just say real quick, Eve transgresses by following that moment, that sensual knowing. She walks, she listens, she sees, she tastes, she eats. She's not thinking, I'm going to burn this garden down. She just follows her desire. Ariadne sees Theseus, wants to leave with him, and she plans, she calculates, she consults experts, she waits. She enacts this very planned out transgression, right? Psyche also does it really differently. She's instigated by her sisters, and she can no longer make love in the dark. She needs to know what she loves. She needs to see his face. And she also has this preparatory aspect. She grabs the knife and the lantern. And so again, there's all these different ways, and I think a lot of different examples. Can transgression be destructive? I mean, yeah, every archetype. That's one of the beautiful parts of this complexity and multiplicity that archetypal psychology or archetypal sensibility invites us into, is that no archetype in this tradition, the way we understand it, is no archetype is good or bad or light or dark. They are always multifaceted, right? So, and I love that, because it's a great reminder just in life. And that back to that curiosity point, is love good or bad? Sometimes. And I'll add that too. Sometimes is one of the most powerful words I know to dismantle monotheistic patriarchal thinking. Just give ourselves some space sometimes. Am I like this? Sometimes. And all of a sudden there's all this space, right? So can transgression be destructive? Yeah. Yes. Is there a shadow to creative transgression? Oh gosh. um,
Speaking
and
of
so that's
transgression, you get the kitty transgressing.
And so again, that lives in the realm of our own discernment and curious engagement. What is happening right now? Is this the call to creative transgression? Sorry. And what is it? What's happening? And we return constantly to that knowing, to that inquiry, to that curiosity. Because certainly there are times when crossing of a boundary is exceedingly violent and not toward freedom, right? So it's a great question that we're asking. And it puts us back in this sense of being where we don't get the comfort of living a prescribed life. We are continually cast into the unknowing and having to be curious and inquire, because we live by a compass, not a map, right? And it's not always easy.
Thank you.
And you only have to take one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
With the compass. It's that adjacent possible. It's not boiling the ocean. It's just doing the one next thing.
Okay, so we have a couple. I'm going to move. We have a question from Johanna. Hi. And she first says thank you, that the book reads like poetry, as poetry for her. And so this one's a bit about the courage conversation. So one of the difficult challenges we encounter is the utter amount of energy to meet the falsities that are told about us here as women, who are the source of the world's ills. We see the continued attack on women in all parts of society and politics, business, etc. Indeed, feeling shame when we challenge these falsities is difficult. And I feel the robbing of energies to face this each day. It's often overwhelming. So what do we do? She's like, courage, yes, but sometimes that doesn't quite feel like enough.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's just, yes, it is difficult. And right now words fail to really name the tragedies that we're watching right now, that we've endured for centuries and centuries. So I I don't know if there's an answer to that other than to say, yeah, we're here. I would say courage and gentleness, because part of this too is it's this paradox, because we're also surrendering the salvational fantasy that somehow we're going to be made worthy again through our efforts and through our working hard enough to finally arrive at a place where we're not shamed, where we're not fallen, where we're not guilty. We are worthy right now. We are good. We are in our belonging. Our belonging is irrevocable. We can never, ever, ever fall outside, walk away from what we're made of. It's an impossibility. We can't even begin to imagine reaching the edge of the universe with our most advanced technologies. Like, we're not going to fall outside of what we're made of. And so I think starting really close in and going really and reminding ourselves of that we're here, we're held, we're worthy. Those stories are lies. And to find ways to just nourish that in our lives, I think is strengthening, and to go gently and to remember that we're not replacing one punishing God for another. That's my hope. We're not, and it's so easy to do. Okay, if I'm not going to be silent, I'm going to always speak. If I'm not going to be subservient, I'm going to always transgress. If I know something, then I have to do something, and sometimes, but this is the thing, in my opinion, you get to know what you know, and you get to decide what to do with that knowing and when. And this is at least the dream, because I'm also honoring that for many in the external political world, this is not the case right now. And that's part of our dream, right? And to start with that inner sovereignty, that sense of, I can know something and then I can decide how to enact it in the world. And I don't have another punishing God that's telling me I'm not good enough because now I'm not doing that new commandment. Does that make sense? Like, it happens so swiftly. And so to come back to the question, I think so much gentleness and tenderness, so much reminder that we are in our belonging now, and cultivating that sense of sovereignty. If you notice, now I feel guilty because I'm not doing this new thing called enlightenment or liberation, or let me be curious about that, because I might have a new punishing God called therapeutic culture, called wellness culture, called self-care, called resistance, that we can just be curious and really tend our lives in the midst of all of these storms that we're in. Some thoughts that come up. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. It makes me think too, just hearing your words and spaces like this that reinforce that reality, what you're feeling is real. And it is a true experience, and it's okay. We're sharing it, but we're also here together.
That's right.
Steph, I want to underscore what you just said. A thumbs up to that. And also, like, for me, rereading things like this are a viable action, a viable choice for something to do that kind of shores up courage and makes the adjacent possible more possible, I feel like. So yeah, going back to what is poetry for you, Johanna, and if you're hearing poetry and empowerment in this book, hold it close is what comes up. Sorry, Steph, back to you.
That's great. No, we have two more
Okay.
comments/questions. So this is from Jody. Just a comment that you are reinforcing for me the idea that we only achieve sovereignty by transgressing. Would you agree that we can know we've really achieved sovereignty when we can assert our selfhood without any feeling of hesitation? Do you want me to reread that?
Oh, yeah, this is the last part.
Would you agree that we can know we've really achieved sovereignty when we can assert our selfhood without feeling any hesitation?
Sometimes But for me, I can speak for me. I don't think I'm ever going to achieve sovereignty in that sense. I don't want to live that way of seeking to achieve, although I hear what you're asking. I think that can become, if that's my measure, for me, I will experience that as another punishing God that says, find the singular monotheistic way of living this out. Sovereignty will always feel like this, and I will never falter. And I don't think I'm gonna do that, in my lifetime. So I think sometimes it means unflinching in the face of oppression. And sometimes I think it means bowing down to how difficult it can be to transgress a very strong commandment and doing it anyways, and sometimes it might mean not doing it and saying, I'm not going to survive this one yet. I need to go back and do some training and eat some vitamins and whatever it is, and then I'll try again. And either way, and no matter what, I'm in my belonging and I am loved and I'm okay. I don't have to do something to be saved. What if we didn't have to be saved? That's really what this work with Eve also brings us back to. And I know that not everyone here most likely grew up the way I did on a religious commune with this very strong salvational fantasy. But so the salvational fantasy drenches modern consciousness. Have enough money and then you'll be okay. Have the right job, have the right partner, have the right kind of love, have the right kind of family, have the right religion, the right God. Then you'll finally be okay. It's everywhere. And that is another piece of this work that we can constantly come back to. I'm trying to relinquish the salvational, conquering, masterful mentality and enter into a continual dance of participation where I'm just constantly engaged. So to come back to the question, I think sometimes yes. And also another question that helps me is, how do I stay engaged honestly with this dance with my own sovereignty and choose it over and over again, whatever it might look like today.
This dance with sovereignty. I love that image.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that. Okay, we have a question from Maggie. So what really resonated with me was that, similar to you, I was raised in a strict Christian community. And even as a young girl, I realized that women were treated in the Bible as second-class citizens at best and could not rationalize belonging to a church that demonized me. Yet I cannot imagine sitting my family down and telling them that, as you did. So maybe this is not a question, but more of an honoring of the courage that it must have taken to do what you did, the steps you took.
Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah. And again, that reminder that there's no prescription. There's just you and your knowing and your wild and precious life. And I trust each of us as the knower of our own lives. And I trust the ripeness of things too, So thank you for honoring that. And yeah, it's been really difficult and really painful. And it's come with a lot of sacrifices and a lot of reward too. And a lot of grief too, to go back to what you're saying about complexity, Stephanie. It's all there. So I also honor your choice and your dance wherever you are with it right now, because that's also courage. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how we're moving from this fixation, this rigidity of holding something so tight, needing it so much, and yet your words, the energy you're bringing into the space is so fluid and moves, and it's like an invitation to live in a space that's much more giving and open and expansive. So again, I just want to offer gratitude, and I think we've got a few more things to close out
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, I want to echo Stephanie's gratitude, Vanya, for writing the book and for being here with us today to share the ideas and bring them even more to life in the conversation that we've had with the community. We have one last quote from the book we'd love to share, and Vanya, if we'd love to invite you to read this one. We'd love to hear it in your voice. So here it is.
When we stand at the center of our own circle, we are creating worlds. We see through the surfaces of things and trust our own knowing, even as we remain deeply connected in the web of our belonging. Draw your circles, friends. Stand at the center. Create new worlds. And so may it be.
Thank you, Vanya. And everyone, let's hear it in the chat again for Vanya's work, for her presence today, for her wisdom, and for everything that she's shared with us.
Thank you all so much. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Vanya. And everyone, also, Stephanie and I would just encourage you to follow Vanya. You can read and share the book, tell all your friends about it. Vanya's on Instagram with @Dr. Vanya Leilani, that handle right there on the slide. Her website is here as well, and I think Stephanie might be dropping it in the chat as I speak, drvanyaleilani.com. Vanya has a podcast. Listen to the podcast. She offers courses. And Vanya, is there anything else about your work that you would especially like to call out for the community today? Or go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, all of this is wonderful. The podcast is called Belonging to the Wild. And I actually have a course that's launching next week that really follows the lines of what we've been talking about and of the book. It's called Wild Sovereignty. So if you're interested in that, definitely reach out. It starts next week and you can find more information on my website. And I just love to hear from all of you any time. So thanks so much for being here. Yeah.
Thank you, Vanya. And everyone, we're going to close. We have just a couple more slides to share, and then we'll close, but we'll leave the webinar open so that you can copy links out of the chat that Stephanie is putting in right now. But first, before we close, we want to share also the next MythLit webinar, which is coming up next month, March 8th. We'll be talking with Maureen Murdoch about her newish book, Myth Making, the self-discovery and the timeless art of memoir, which I feel like kind of continues our theme for the year, which is practicing enchantment, as we've witnessed Vanya's enchantment today. And this one is March 8th is actually the 1-year birthday of this book. So we'll be celebrating this book's birthday with Maureen next month. And you can register for this webinar on the Fates and Graces website at fatesandgraces.com/webinars. And Steph, I think we're ready for the next slide, which is almost the last one. This is how you can connect with the Fates and Graces. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our email list at our website. Just the homepage has the little form on it, fatesandgraces.com. And as usual, Stephanie and I want to extend a super special thank you to our patrons. We have a Patreon at the website here, patreon.com/join/fates and graces. And our patrons are the ones whose support is making it possible for this webinar to happen and for it to be free. So let's hear it in the chat for our patrons because of everything they do to support this work. Patrons, if you want to join the patron circle, patrons are invited to quarterly Zoom check-ins on the solstices and the equinoxes, where we have a chance to just kind of catch up on what we're all working on, what we're reading, and anything that's on our minds. And so our next patron gathering will obviously be in March for the spring equinox. So again, if you'd like to join that circle and support the work, you can visit the website there. And thank you so much from me and Stephanie to the patrons. And that is just about it for today. Thank you so much for being here and for talking about these ideas with us. We hope that you keep reading, keep writing, and keep celebrating the field of mythological literature. We'll see you next time.
Wonderful.